Does David Bentley Hart think that mind and matter connect, body and soul, invisible and visible things? What is it that helps or relates the invisible immaterial world with the visible material world? There's been a lot of ways to think about this. Some people think, well, it's not really an invisible world. Everything is physical. There's biological reactions that create what we call will, intention, consciousness, love, all that kind of invisible type stuff. That's really just a chemical effect in our body that we experience, and we believe it is something beyond merely the physical. Others say, well, yeah, the soul is real, but it's sort of the life of the body. It sort of inhabits you like a ghost in a machine, and your body is lifeless in matter, and the soul is the thing that animates it. And while, that's a generally standard idea in history, this is a little bit more of a Cartesian view where the body is sort of just the immaterial stuff that the soul animates. Now, David Bentley Hart, in his new book, All Things Are Full of Gods, has a different way of viewing this. He's attempting to deny I don't want to say any form, but most forms of dualism. He doesn't really want to affirm the Cartesian dualism, the substance dualism of body and soul, and he wants to affirm something that's a little bit more like a monism. There's sort of a oneness of body and soul. Yes, you can talk about them. Yes, they might have operations that are proper to each, but that's just kind of how we talk. It's not really the actual ontological idea here. And in his third chapter of this book, which I guess is the first day of dialogues in his book, the third chapter of the first day of dialogues more accurately, he goes through a number of fallacies of method. And the method, I guess, is the method to bridge this sort of chasm between the body and the soul, or at least to describe that, I suppose. So, he goes through this. There's the qualitative. There's a qualitatively absolute difference between the body and soul, external and internal, third person, first person experience. I guess more accurately, that last part is what he's saying. And a lot of people try to bridge that chasm between third person description and first person experience by saying you can, there's all these fallacies, like the Platonistic fallacy, the fallacy of terminal dualism, etc. I'm not really sure that I need to go through all of these. They're interesting. I mean, one of the things he says is interesting is that it's basically a fallacy to believe that over time we could just find, through third-person observation, some way to really fully grasp first-person subjective experience. So arguments like that's just not possible because they're entirely different things. One's quantitative reasoning, one's qualitative subjective experience. I actually find that to be the most important fallacy of method that he draws out. It's not that you can just accumulate more and add more. It's not an additive problem. It's not a problem of insufficient information. It's a problem of incongruent methodology. But what I really want to get at is his solution, I think, to understanding what the body and mind are and how they connect. And here's what he says, and it might be a little bit shocking. He says, in the voice of Suke, whatever the nature of matter may be, the primal reality of all things is mind. So whatever the nature of matter may be, so stuff, the primal reality of all things is mind. So mind is more primal. To the degree that matter exists in its own proper nature, it does so as a product of mind, subsisting as a set of rational relations within a larger equation, as it were. This I believe because I don't think mind can be physically reducible or emergent reality arising from truly mindless matter. Nor do I think matter could possibly constitute the simpler, more comprehensive ground of unity between the corporeal and mental. Matter without mind can't become mind, but mind can become all things. Mind in itself must be simpler, more basic, unifying ground, and matter must be an expression of mind, infinite mind, in fact. My position is idealism, in short, not of the sort the early Berkeley espoused, but of the classical variety that sees the material realm not as a mere mirage, but rather as a real but dependent emanation of the noetic, the higher mental realm. It's also perhaps Aristotelian in that I insist that mind and life are one reality ultimately. The same principle of rational relations that creates the integrated and self-replicating reality of an organism is also the principle of its consciousness and mental agency. And that principle is, well, in Greek, psyche, soul, life. Now, he goes on to give some nuance in this, but it's a bit of a holism, you might say. What he's getting at, though, I think is kind of profound and worth reflecting on. For most of us, we think that if you reduce the sort of material stuff that we are, you might discover the constituent chemical elements that produce the effect that we call consciousness or thinking. There must be some chemical, there must be some biological answer to the problem, and this idea is kind of deeply based on how we assume the world works. But David Bentley Hart's saying, well, what if we just flip the script and said, actually, there's nothing really reducible in matter that can describe whatever it is that we describe intention, consciousness, all that kind of stuff. But the other way around actually works, that mind, mental thinking, intention, all that kind of stuff, you could actually fit in the materialism, the matter within that. Like it's you can reduce backwards and make sense of matter within mind. So mind would be primary. It's the bigger category within which matter works and lives and breathes and acts and so on. Now this wouldn't make sense if mind or soul or whatever is this kind of Casper the Friendly Ghost stuff. But no, he's actually arguing that mind is substantial, real, just as substantial, maybe even more substantial than your body and flesh. It's not this amorphous, non-physical, floaty, wispy thing. It is just as real as you are, which is why he has a kind of holism when it comes to body and soul. It's not that your soul is this little immaterial, invisible thing inside of you hiding. It's what you are. You just are who you are. You are your soul. You are yourself. And the way that logically it kind of has to work is that whatever matter is something that fits into mind, which has to be prior, because mind can include both all the mental aspects and all the physical aspects that we experience, which is why I don't know if this is why, but is one reason why he finds the four causes of Aristotle compelling to explain how things work. And it's, as David Bentley Hart's quick to say, it's not in competition with the physical causes like velocity, motion, all that kind of stuff, force, but rather it's a bigger picture description of how things are. So efficient cause, formal cause, material cause, final cause. These are actually more reasons than cause. Is kind of weird because in the modern world, cause is a physical cause and effect, but causes in the Aristotelian sense are just reasons or explanations for why things are. And so you see this, when you describe, okay, well, you have, fire and wood. When the fire comes, it's, let's say, an efficient cause. If someone lights the fire, maybe, or the fire has some sort of animating force. And it comes to the wood that is, and I should add, it's not just the four causes, it's also the theory of change in Aristotle, which is potency to actuality. So something could be anything, has the possibility of it, but it not actually is anything until something changes it. So this is really important. And when fire comes to wood, it's potentially hot, and fire heats it up, so it's actually hot. But the wood itself maybe is cool, and the fire perhaps then is cooled. Let's just, or a rain comes and maybe cools the fire down. Or maybe another better example would be you have a hot iron that you put into water. The water is potentially hot. The hot iron heats the water. The water is potentially the iron is potentially cool, and the water cools it. And the water is potentially hot, and the iron heats it up. And there's a mutually sense in which there's an actuality to potentiality, potentiality to actuality, back and forth. It's almost like they're having a conversation of change. And this is all fitting in with the material and formal causality. And what David Bentley Hart says is, yeah, you see this. It's almost like there's an analogy here, just as ideas and thoughts awaken and are awakened by each other in conversation. So even the way that the physical world works in terms of the big picture of how change happens is a sort of analog into how mind works. And therefore, it's even kind of fitting. It's not like an argument that he's making. He's just talking about fittingness at this point, I believe. He doesn't use the word fittingness, but I assume that's what he's getting at. There's a fittingness to the way that the physical world works, and then you can see it being integrated into the mental reality. But again, it's not that these are just two different things. They're just one thing for him. The physical, the material, is the mind made manifest. It's not less mind or less soul because it's physical. These are basically one thing for him, although there's maybe a logical distinction because of, consciousness is different than like a fingernail. But they are kind of basically one. There's a holism and a oneism, you might say. And he's pushing back against strict dualisms. There might be maybe some sort of formal dualism here in terms of our logic and so on. But for him, for David Bentley Hart, one of the interesting parts of this chapter is that he sees mind as a prior reality to matter and not the other way around. You can't reduce matter to find mind, but you could maybe reduce mind to find matter. It's a different way of viewing things, but you have to then believe that mind or soul is either more or equally substantial to the material things. You can't believe that mind is Casper the Friendly Ghost floating away, or like fog, or like a wisp. It has to be substantial, real in that sense. So you are your soul. That's what your body is. It's your body and soul by description, but you're just that what you are, that wholeness of it all. Now, I don't know if that's very persuasive to anyone, and I don't know in this chapter he's trying to persuade everyone of it, but he's still at the beginning of his book trying to define what it is that he believes. And I think at least one thing I'm appreciating about David Bentley Hart in this book is that he's saying what he believes in clear ways, and that's quite helpful because a lot of academic literature hides behind the apparatus of history and logic chopping and historical research. But because all things are full of gods, this book is in the form of a Platonic dialogue or a discussion. You have people asking common sense questions after an argument is made, and the characters having to answer them just like if you were talking to friends about these things. And what that does is it kind of eliminates the academic, the weakness in academic writing. That is, you can't speak clearly because you have to give 1,000 nuances about everything. You can't just answer questions, which is, I think, why so many people feel like they're unable to access academic material. Whereas this book, All Things Are Full of Gods, I think anyone could access it. I think if you did, you might need, you might just have like your phone near you to look up a few words in the dictionary here or there, and that would give you, kind of most of what you need to make the best of it. And yes, if you don't have a philosophical background to kind of know this language, I think you'd probably have to Google a few, like, was it the Stanford Philosophical Dictionary website? Just go there, Google idealism and all this kind of stuff to figure out the basic definitions of these things, because he assumes a lot of those. At the same time, he's pretty good at explaining what he means by his words, so I think, possibly you could get away from having to use dictionaries and still have a full-orbed ability to read and enjoy this book. Well, that was a bit of a rambly video today, but I just wanted to outline a little bit of how David Bentley Hart views the mind as prior to matter and how he unites those two, namely through no explicit dualism, but rather through a holism, oneism, whatever you want to call it, molism. So that's what he does do. I'll continue to give some summaries of this book. I think the next chapter I probably won't, if I remember correctly, which is a very short one on definitions, or maybe I even skip the definition chapter. But insofar as they're interesting and maybe help to advance thinking and can be clarifying, I will continue to do these videos as long as they make sense to do so. Thanks for joining me, and I will see you next time.